Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of FinTechTainment, where we try to bring you valuable content in an honest, informative, and engaging way. So, for today's episode, we're having on Mr. 𝙁𝙤𝙪𝙧𝙪, who is the founder and CEO of Neutronpay, a fintech payment startup that leverages the Bitcoin Lightning Network, connecting the world of traditional finance to the fascinating world of the blockchain. So, welcome. It's an honor and a pleasure to have you onto our podcast today. And yeah, it's a really nice pleasure to know you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, I'm sure the audience would really want to know who's this handsome-looking man, who's the founder and CEO of a fintech startup. So, there's not a lot of information about you yet I've introduced. So, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name is 𝙁𝙤𝙪𝙧𝙪. I'm the founder and CEO of Neutronpay. Neutronpay is a focused Bitcoin Lightning company. We focus on infrastructure. And what that means is we provide infrastructure for businesses to be able to connect into the Lightning Network. And then we have a bunch of products that will be able to be built from that infrastructure. So we're pretty much known for a lot for payments for now, because that's one of the verticals that is most understandable by a lot of the businesses that we service today.
So, maybe a good start is to talk about something that's very relevant to the student audience today, which is your university days. Mm-hmm. I know that you're from a computer engineering major. So how was that experience like, and how did you find computer engineering, and how did you make the transition from computer engineering to going into the fintech industry?
Yeah, I mean, getting to computer science was, I think, a luck of the draw for me. I wanted to do aerospace engineering. That was very interesting to me. How I got into computer engineering was actually a funny story. My mom brought me back to Vietnam in 1999, and I was about 18 at that time. So how I figured out computers was my uncle had a shop, and he had a bunch of games, right? So people were playing StarCraft at the time and Age of Empires. I don't know if people remember that, but it was way back in the 90s. But he had a little local LAN shop, and there was about 15 computers there. Two of the computers broke because the power supply just went out of service because obviously the heat and the humidity. And so I asked my uncle, what is this? Because I never understood what computers were. And then he said, this is kind of like the future, and this is where kids like to play games. And so when those two power supplies broke, he had to call someone to come up and actually fix those for him. And it cost, at the time, back in the day, was $50 a piece. And so $50 US dollars a piece just to fix power supplies. Back in the day, you can imagine that's pretty expensive. So right now, that'd probably be about 1.5, maybe 1.7 million at the time, just to fix a power supply. And the guy came over on his moped, and he did a 15-minute job on both of them. All he did was literally take out the cables, put the new power supply in, put the cables in, and did something which is called a post test, right, to make sure that the power supply would work and the operating system would come up. So that's really my kind of deep dive into computer engineering or computers, because I told my uncle, I said, I'll do that for you so you can save $100. So you don't have to pay this guy who's done literally 15 minutes of work. I'll go do that, and I'll go study back in Canada, and I'll come back and fix that for you. And so that's kind of how I got into computer engineering. And then going into the fintech space was kind of like a little bit of a different story. It was after computer engineering, I come from a country or a province that's more oil based, right? So Alberta is where I was born, and we do a lot of oil and gas up in there. So after computer engineering, I went to pretty much, you can call it the oil fields up north. And that's where I pretty much did a lot of my computer knowledge after, which was just setting up a bunch of, you can think of like remote kind of campsites, because these campsites are very far north. And you just have to set up internet, you have to set up computer systems like fax machines and other like desktop computers for them to operate. And that's pretty much what I was doing first. And then eventually getting into fintech was just, again, a stroke of luck when I went into fintech.
So you work initially in the oil and gas industry, which is quite obvious because Canada is actually quite prominent in that industry. But I'm really curious to know and really understand your thought process, transitioning from the oil, the very lucrative oil and gas industry to the fintech space, which is, quite an entrepreneurial space. It's a risky space. It's go big or go home space. How did you make that transition, and what was your thought process like? I'm really curious to hear what that thought process was like.
Yeah, when I was in oil and gas, it was, to me, after getting out of college and getting my degree, it was kind of disheartening, right? Because when you go and kind of get into computers, you're expecting this huge pay, you're expecting a lot of stuff to come out of it. But when I got out of college and I was going out into the field, the first job was literally help desk, right? So I got help desk, and then that was out of obviously the oil and gas field. Then I moved my way up. My actual major wasn't in anything in finance. It was more or less in network management. So network engineering was kind of my major, and that's what I went into. And how I fell into a lot of the fintech space was, again, like I said, it was just kind of like a stroke of luck. Because when you're in the oil and gas industry, there is nothing to do with finance. There's nothing to do with fintech at all. But there was this one company that was in Alberta, which was called 𝙁𝙤𝙪𝙧𝙪. And 𝙁𝙤𝙪𝙧𝙪 is a treasury management crown corporation of Alberta. And so what that means is that they actually take Alberta's treasury fund, and then they go and do obviously trades and anything else in finance to be able to gain more money from the actual allocated pot. And so at that time, when I joined 𝙁𝙤𝙪𝙧𝙪 was managing about $7.2 billion of Alberta's funds, right? And that's including like pension and retirement funds and everything else like that. And so getting into that was, again, like a stroke of luck, because I went from oil and gas, and then this company came up and said, hey, would you like to come and work for us? We're building out a bunch of infrastructure, right, to facilitate a lot of these trades that we're trying to do to manage the $7.2 billion of Alberta's funds. And so when I came onto that job, I was more of a network engineer, but then I kind of transitioned over into more of like server side, which is kind of operational stuff. Now it's called like DevOps and SecOps and stuff like that. So more kind of security and server infrastructure setup. And so that's kind of blended me to the trajectory of doing more fintech, was just because of that. And so from 𝙁𝙁𝙪𝙧𝙪, I worked at 𝙁𝙁𝙪𝙧𝙪 for a few years. Then I jumped into another fintech company and another fintech company. And then I came up to obviously start my own company, which was Neutronpay. So having that fintech kind of transition wasn't really a decision I made. It was more or less life choices that kind of came out of nowhere, and you just decide to take, either you stay in oil and gas or you take a chance to go into a different field. And so that was more or less a stroke of luck.
Do you think that was a great luck?
Yeah, I think there's times in your life where, things and opportunities show up, and it's up to you if you want to make a decision to take it or not, right? A lot of people figure out that if you just do one straight path, that's probably the path that you want to take. But life throws a lot of, obviously, curveballs. I think everyone knows that. And I think it's just up to you if you want to determine the type of risk that you would like to take for your life. And the only thing I did was just because I'm a little bit of a high risk taker, right? Especially when I was younger, is I just believed that everything was awesome, right? So if anything new came up that I didn't understand, I always wanted to learn it. And I always wanted to go and explore and figure out what can I do better. And that's why I like to challenge myself. So yeah, it was a little bit more of a very good stroke of luck that came through. But again, with that luck, it's at the end of the day, it's your decision to make that choice, right? And so I think I believe I made the right choice.
So it was a combination of luck, chance, and coincidence, and also your curiosity for learning about a new industry that drove you into this fintech space, right?
Yeah.
Actually, it's very interesting. So this is not a question, but more of a reflection, because this is not the first time on our podcast that we had a guest who fell into a similar situation where they started off first in the energy space, but then they transitioned into the fintech space, and then later into the climate tech space. Mm-hmm. So if you guys are watching, it's actually episode 3 we did with 𝙁𝙤𝙪𝙧𝙪, who's the president of 𝙁𝙤𝙪𝙧𝙪. But I digress. So you said you worked a lot of different companies. Can you name some of the companies that you work for in the fintech space before you started Neutronpay? Yeah.
So when I left 𝙁𝙁𝙪𝙧𝙪, I worked for another company which was called, I think it was called, I can't remember the exact name, but it was $something. And what they did was they did loans. And so it was a loan facility that if you couldn't get a bank loan, you would go to these other second tier kind of loaning facilities,
Right.
which were very expensive. And so I worked there for about a couple of years. And then I transitioned out to another company that was called Hyperwallet. And Hyperwallet was a company that did mass payouts. And so mass payouts at the time wasn't a big thing. And so mass payouts, to understand what mass payouts were, is what we would do is we would take a lump sum of money from a company and we would go and do a mass payout to 190 countries, right? So of our 190 countries that Hyperwallet serviced, it would say, hey, I would take that money and I would pay out to, say, for example, like Africa. I'd pay out to kind of Hong Kong. I'd pay out to Singapore. And so you can think of the businesses that would use this type of service would probably be like Uber and probably like Airbnb and probably be like Expedia. So at the time, these kind of gig economy things would use our services to go pay out contractors and employees in different countries. And so that was kind of the last fintech company that I worked for. They got acquired by PayPal in, I think, 2016 or 2017 for about 400 something million. I didn't get any cut of that. I was an early employee, but I wasn't early enough to get shares. I was just early enough to be a part of their startup and then grow it into a very large company. And that came from a lot of the experience of the infrastructure that I helped them build. But while I was there, that's where I started Neutronpay.
So Hyperwallet is kind of like an infrastructure app that facilitates payments for the gig economy players like Grab, Uber, and all these players, right?
Yeah. So you can think of it as like if you're a big company that has a bunch of contractors all over the world, and your main, obviously, like what we did was service a lot of US customers. They had a lot of employees and contractors all over the world, so they would use services like us. And back in the day, this was probably, I would say back in the day, it's probably like, 10 years ago.
That's a very long time ago.
Yeah, it was like 10 years ago. It was 2014, early 2014 was when I started with Hyperwallet. And there was only about, I think, 3 or 4 companies that are very similar to Hyperwallet. And so we were very niche in that kind of category. And then as we started building, a bunch of these other companies started saying, hey, you guys have a good market share of businesses that want to use this particular service, and then a bunch of them started popping up, and then that's why Hyperwallet sold to PayPal.
Have you heard of the concept of an intrapreneur?
Intrapreneur?
Yeah.
No.
So I'm actually very interested in the entrepreneurship, startup space at a very early age. Maybe that's one of the reasons why I'm doing this podcast. But I know of the terminology of intrapreneurship. Basically, you join a part of a company very early on, and then you work to grow that company as if you're you own kind of like a sweat equity in the company. You're a part of it in its very early story, and then you get a massive payout when it's sold or when it's traded, something like that. And I think maybe is that something that you would describe it as an entrepreneurship experience? Going along, marching along with the founders and the initial shareholders. Was that an entrepreneur experience?
Yes and no. I mean, it depends on how you would view it. On my take, on my personal kind of opinion on it, and the reason why I was working quite hard at that company to build something is because I wanted something on my own, regardless if it wasn't my business, right? I think that's what's kind of lost within generations that have come out, meaning that I came from a generation, I'm a little bit older, but I've come in a generation where I was born in the 80s, right? So coming from that era, from born in the 80s, the instillment of what you learned when you're a little bit in that era is about hard work, right? And that hard work is meaning that if you work hard, you get long hours, you get the experience, you're able to build something of your own later. That was kind of what I was told, right? It's very different now, right? Now it's about having a bunch of things, side hustle, and doing things like that. So having that entrepreneurial stuff, yes, I kind of say like if you think that you could do that to make sure that you have enough experience to go do your own thing, yes. But I think it was more or less just me wanting to be able to show that I was proud of my own work, right? Because if I could do it, and I can show myself that I could build something for this company without anything in kickback or return, I would be able to take that skill and do that somewhere else. And that's where Neutronpay arose, was if you take the time to do the hard work and figure out the experiences and stuff like that, you can take that as that's the key. That's the riches that I got from it, was all that experience I then turned into a business of my own, because you're not going to be able to be taught that. Someone has to tell you that. And what I mean is someone inside of you has to tell you that, right? Is you have to be able to dig deep to figure out, like, a lot of people look for like guidance. Guidance is good, but you need to be able to look deeper inside to figure out what do you really want, and what do you really want to get out of either A, a job, and B, what do you want to do in the future? That's only decided by your decisions and what you want to do with your time.
And so you took all of that experience from HyperWallet, from building something from a very small scale to something that was sold to, if I remember correctly, it's PayPal? Or
PayPal, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Sold by PayPal, that kind of motivated you to start your own thing.
Yeah, because I think everyone is scared to either sometimes start a business, which is not bad, right? There's people that just like to do and work at a company. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? Because if you work at the company long enough and you do the right things, you move up to the right levels, right? But there's some people that just do that for experience, to be able to move into a different job or to be able to get enough experience to start another business. That's what I think it is.
Let's talk about Neutronpay. So when you started out Neutronpay, what was a practical user problem, or maybe an infrastructure-related problem, or a Bitcoin-related problem that you were trying to solve? Like why did it exist, or why was it created? What problem did it solve?
That's a good question. I mean, the reason why I started Bitcoin was, the Neutronpay wasn't because of a particular problem that we needed to solve, right? It's 50% of the equation. The other thing was because if you understand what Bitcoin is from computer science or computer engineering side, and you break down the pieces of it and understand what it's there for, it would make a little bit more sense. And so I don't want to get too technical into it, but because of the technology itself, it's infrastructure. It's something that we need for, I think, for the next generation and for generations beyond, like, say, my kids and whatever else. Because we've been stuck in this era of kind of centralized infrastructure. And it's worked for a period of time, and now it's not working. It's caused a lot of issues, it's caused a lot of greed, and it's caused a lot of misinformation, right? So obviously I think everyone understands there's media, there's also social posts and everything else like that, right? So Neutronpay was actually built just because of infrastructure, meaning there's going to be a whole new ecosystem, I believe, and this is the risk that I'm taking, is that I think there's going to be a whole new ecosystem built on Bitcoin, right? And so we're focused mainly on the layer 2 side, which is the Lightning side. And that's more for quicker payments, instant payments, the normal stuff that people would understand on the payment side, right, of the technology. But the actual technology itself, Bitcoin has a bunch of things that it can be built from. And that's why they call it programmable money. And so that's where it comes from, right? So problems, yes, we do solve a couple other problems, which is probably from a global side. So if you ever try to make a payment from, say, Canada to Vietnam, if you're doing that, you go through bank to bank, correct? So if you do that, you're doing through a wire or SWIFT transfer. That usually takes about 3 to 5 days, right? In today's world, people don't want to wait 3 to 5 days, right? And with the Lightning Network, we can do that instantly, globally, within a few seconds. So that's one problem that we're solving. The other problem that we are solving is removing it from central entities. So yes, we're a central entity ourselves, but we have the ability to go move that to a decentralized method where you can have your own wallet. You can put it into your own hardware wallet, right? So we have those methods of offshoots. And so that's kind of where we're building Neutronpay to be on board the next kind of generation of users, and then educate them and show them that there are other options where you can be your own bank. You can have self-custody, as people would say, and you can manage your own funds. But if you don't, then you can use Neutronpay for that.
Right. So I really want to understand the business model. But before I get into that, from your answer, you said a lot of terms about decentralization versus centralization. And as somebody who's been an avid observer of this space for a long time, like these two keywords have been repeated over and over again. Like, what's the fuzz about centralization versus decentralization? I mean, can't we? I'm doing devil's advocate, like, you know, being an average student, just very new to this space. Like, can't we live with traditional centralized legacy systems? Why do we have to transition to this new thing, this decentralized infrastructure? What's your response to that? What do you think about that?
Yeah, my response is you don't have to. That's the beautiful thing, right? You have choice, right? I think the narrative that people push is like, we have to move to this. We don't. It's up to you. The decentralization is a choice. It's probably not going to be a fit for a lot of people. But for the people that do understand why they want to move away from it, they'll have their own reasons to do it, right? And I think that's all it is. It's just an option, right? If you want to move over to decentralization, people feel more liberated. They feel that they have more freedom to do that. Because in today's society, right, with centralization, is you have a watchful eye, right? Every single government in the world is going to watch what you do. That's just what we live in today. That's the normal world, right? People don't mind that. I would say the way I look at it is, I call it the 90-10 split, right? Is 90% of the world doesn't care that decentralized exists, right? They're fine with centralization systems because it works fine. They have someone to take care of them. They have someone to take care of the services for them. There's insurance. There's all this stuff, right? People are just used to it. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just some people just don't like that anymore because of the other downsides of that, right? Decentralization, again, like, is an option. You can move over to it and be totally in control of your money. You can do what you like. You can make sure that no one is peering into your finances. You can make sure that you can easily move where you need to, where some people feel paranoid and don't want to have the government watch them 24/7. And that's where I see the distinction between the two. It's not that you have to go to it. It's just another option for people to decide to go to.
So what's your reason?
My reason from a subjective side is I've seen enough doing a lot of the stuff that I do in work that I don't like centralized systems. It's kind of funny because we are building a centralized system, but I'll get into that. But the centralized systems today, especially through the banks and everything else like that, are not like they were before, right? Today it's very surveillanced. Everything is watched. And then today, if you layer on top of it, if you say anything bad within social media or anything obviously online, you get canceled, right? So that can easily affect your livelihood. That can affect your bank. That can affect your relationships, everything like that. And that's all tied under centralization. So you're not really free to say anything, even though they say you are free to say and do what you want online. That doesn't necessarily equal out to what they've said, right? So I don't know if people probably played around on YouTube and say Instagram or Facebook, right? Is each of these entities have rules in place that you can say certain things and you can't say things, right? And a lot of people have already voiced that online. So you probably see that on TikTok as well. There's a lot of rules on what you can say and do. And that's all tied to everything. Censorship, exactly. So it's tied to everything that you do in your life. And so that's why I've moved over a little bit more to the decentralized factor of that, because it's, I just like to take care of my own finances. And maybe some of the audience likes to do that too as well, right? But maybe they like to keep in banks. But I've done that because it's just my personal preference. Obviously, there's a couple of things that I do, and that's why. And the reason why Neutronpay is kind of funny, I'm trying to contradict myself, is when Neutronpay is kind of a centralized entity, but we're doing a different roadmap. We're trying to get people onboarded onto a new technology. And the only way to learn and to get people on is to have a very smooth experience. And once they're used to the tech and they know how to use like Lightning Network and stuff like that, then we can offer the educational courses to understand like non-custodial stuff and decentralized aspects of if this is of interest to you. If not, you can still stay on the centralized services.
So I want to understand Neutronpay and the way that it functions. Can you talk a little bit about its business model?
Yeah, so we run through a set of APIs. And APIs allows for any business to customize and kind of integrate the Lightning Network into their business. The easiest way for them to do that is probably pulling it into an app or their web service. And how we would build that is we build it usually through a monthly service. And that monthly service is $2,500 for monthly service. We charge a 1% fee. And then we take whatever is higher at the end of the month. So you can think of it as if you're making more than $2,500 in fees, we'll take the higher amount. If it's below that, then we take $2,500 a month.
So you said about the Lightning Network, and I know that there's a lot of tech students listening to our podcast. Would you mind to explain a little bit about what the Lightning Network is, and maybe explain the nuance between the layer 1 and the layer 2, which is the domain you're operating in?
Yeah, Bitcoin layer 1 is run by, I would say, probably a bunch of miners, right? So the easiest way to describe it is every 10 minutes, Bitcoin comes out. There's a specific amount that comes out every 10 minutes. And right now we're in the 4th post-halving. And what that means is that the supply of Bitcoin gets cut in half every 4 years, right? Right now we're sitting at 3.125, I believe. And so every 10 minutes that's cut. Bitcoin operates on a 10-minute interval, right? Some people consider that slow. I think that's pretty fast for anything that's global. But then as people started getting on, the scalability problem started coming up where not everyone in the world would want to transact on layer 1. And this is where layer 2 came, because they were saying we would be able to service the
because it relates to the blockchain trilemma, right? Of decentralization, scalability, and security.
Yeah, but it's more or less because people believed that it was too slow. And people wanted a faster service, right? People believe that we should have instant payments, where Bitcoin is, the layer 1 is 10 minutes, right? And they call it confirmations. So you'd have to get a confirmation in order to be able to settle your transaction. That would be a confirmation. Layer 2 was needed just to kind of facilitate the scalability issue. Was if we tried to onboard 7 billion-ish people in the world, it wouldn't scale. There would be just too many people trying to get into a transaction to settle, and the fee market would just be really high. So Bitcoin has a fee market, so meaning that if you want to get into the block, you can think of it as like a bus, right? A bus would come every 10 minutes. There's only a certain amount of seats that can be taken, and whoever pays a higher fee within that 10-minute block, you'll get a seat. If not, you get pushed back to wait for the next bus, right? So you can imagine if 7 billion people really wanted to get on, everyone's paying a higher fee to get into the bus, and now you're leaving everybody else in the rest of the world not being able to get onto that bus. And so that's why the layer 2 solution was created, was for scalability, to get people on. And if we had more people, like 1 billion more people to come on, layer 2 would be able to service that. So Lightning is just, a lot of people will call it like, some people call it a side chain, but it's Bitcoin. It's just using off-chain transactions. So meaning layer 2 allows you to have instant transactions, because now you and I have created a ledger together. So it's called a channel. So if we created a channel together, think about it like an abacus. So an abacus obviously has a line and there's beads on either side, right? So if I create a channel with you, think of it an abacus. I have beads on this side. This is the amount of funds I can send to you. So I can send you a bunch of funds, and you can create a channel to me, and you can send money to me, and we have a ledger that updates every time you and I create a transaction. So that's why the Lightning Network is a lot better, because it doesn't rely on the miners and every 10 minutes to process a transaction, right? Because every 10 minutes, you have to wait for the transaction to settle. Now, you and I have the layer 2 are allowed to go transact as much as we want. We update the ledgers between each other, and if we close this channel, then we will go back to layer 1. And so say you had a balance of 30% of that channel and I had 70% of the channel, then we would be able to record that transaction on chain.
But this does not sacrifice the decentralization factor, right?
It doesn't, because what Lightning uses is called a unilateral exit, meaning that you can exit at any time and I can exit at any time. So it uses something that's called a multi-sig, which is a 2 of 2. So you can cancel an exit out of our channel, and then you would get the amount of whatever it is that we transacted and whatever amount that we agreed on the ledger, right? So that's why it's decentralized, because anyone can leave at any time. There's no counterparty risk. There's no one in the middle saying that you can't and you can't dissolve it. Anyone can and can get out of Lightning layer 2.
And for Neutronpay, your business strategy right now is you're trying to onboard many merchants in Vietnam to use the Neutronpay API, right?
Yes, correct. Yeah. So we're trying to get more. So we're more B2B focused instead of B2C, which is retail. B2B is we feel the approach is a lot better. B2B is a top-down approach. So
Right.
we'll go to a larger business, we'll go pitch them, let them know that the Lightning Network provides this, and usually it's for payments, right? So it's another alternative payment for your customers, right? And how they want to go and push that out to their customer base is up to them. But it's usually another line of revenue, right? Because they'll have the traditional payment side, and then now they have a different payment side, right? And this is usually more for a lot of their customers that are the Gen Z or late millennials, right?
Mm.
So a lot of the businesses now in Vietnam probably have a lot of, Gen Z customers, and they're figuring out how do we service these customers, right? And a lot of obviously the Gen Z side and late millennials are a little bit more focused in the blockchain stuff. And so for them to have that option is just another source of revenue for those businesses. And that's how we go and approach them to use Neutronpay.
Right. So maybe just to clarify for the audience, which is that right now a lot of merchants, they accept mostly local currency transactions, or in rare cases they foreign currency exchanges. But actually, that's quite rare in my experience. So what you're trying to do is you're creating another channel where you're allowing for Bitcoin transactions. That if they hold Bitcoin, they can transact in those merchants, and then it will be converted into the local currency. Is that correct?
Correct. So you can look at it as, if a lot of people are from the finance side or from banking, is what we use the Lightning Network for is for settlement. So today's settlement obviously is used by the US dollar, right? So anything that's wire and SWIFT is settled by US dollar and then converted into XYZ currency. We're just taking that piece out and putting in a decentralized piece, which is Bitcoin. And we use that as a settlement method using the Lightning Network. So you can think of it as, for example, in today's scenario and use case is there's a large company in the US, very similar to Momo, right? But it's a public company. They're worth $40 to $50 billion. They're called Cash App. So Cash App was the very first US company to enable Lightning, right? We have Lightning already. So now anyone who's a Vietnamese that's in the United States that has Cash App can now instantly send US dollars to Vietnam because Neutronpay would receive it and instantly convert it to VND. So now you remove the Western Unions, the MoneyGrams, the wires, going to the bank to wait. You literally just have it in the mobile app in your hand, and people are very used to using Cash App. Now it's just scanning a QR code and you would receive VND on the other side instantly.
So it's a fintech revolution in a sense that it enables faster cross-border transactions and settlement.
Correct. The way I would look at it is, from a retail space, yes, it's for remittances to pay, say, family members back home, vice versa, either way, from Vietnam to US or US to Vietnam. But the way I look at it is bringing countries closer together. So the reason why we look at it from a business level side is, I believe in the next few years, we could use it for commerce trade, right? So not being dependent and reliant on SWIFT and wire. So meaning that the US is pretty much a dominant controlling player in banking systems, right? So if you use SWIFT and wire and something is wrongfully said, that could put you under sanctions and that would shut you off. So we're just providing an alternative solution that I think that would be helpful for the next generation and for just an alternative payment. We're not saying it replaces wire and SWIFT, but it helps move the next generation into some other payment that we'll be able to receive payments a lot easier in Vietnam.
So you started the company originally in Canada, right? Why did you decide to penetrate into the Vietnamese market? Like, what's the rationale behind that?
To really generalize it, because I'm Vietnamese.
And then you want to do something in your home country, all that stuff?
Correct. I wanted to bring it back home. I wanted Vietnam to have an edge, and I wanted.
Is there a business case for it, other than a personal case, right?
Yeah, I mean that's personal and a business case as well, right? The opportunities in Vietnam are very abundant, right? And I think Vietnam's very open to a lot of new stuff. Obviously, a little bit slower with regulation and how that works and the frameworks. But I think it's getting there, right? Because there's so many things that are happening in Vietnam, right? And to bring it home, it just makes it feel a lot, to me personally. Obviously, it's a personal goal, but from an objective goal, from a business side, it's very beneficial, right? Regardless of my feelings or not, the tech itself is very beneficial, I think, to the country. Whether there's a bad take on it or a good take, I think technology will help either country, right? And if the US is really pulling ahead with the technology, why wouldn't we take a chance and move that to Vietnam as well? Because I think Vietnam and US relationships are pretty tight. I think they understand innovation really well. And I just want Vietnam to excel into a better financial kind of hub, just like Singapore, right? I think we have the right opportunities. We have the younger generation that is capable and fit. I think we have a lot of smart people here, but we just need to have a little bit more education and a lot more kind of use cases of other businesses that are here that are taking that risk to show the younger generation and obviously government and regulators to show that we're not here to go and try to replace, we're trying to here to add to Vietnam, to make it better, to add value, to make it a lot better.
So I want to move on to the discussion about Bitcoin, because I know that you've talked a lot about Bitcoin, and your startup kind of facilitates that infrastructure for mass adoption around the world. I have heard a lot of people describe you, well, maybe a few people described you as a Bitcoin OG. Basically, my understanding of a Bitcoin OG is somebody who adopted Bitcoin very early on in its 2013-14 phase, or actually even earlier than that, during 2009, 2010. How did that come about? And actually, first of all, is that characterization correct, Bitcoin OG? And how did that come about?
Yeah, I wouldn't say Bitcoin OG. I would just say Bitcoin class of 2013. There are other OGs that are way before me and that have way more experience than I do. And a lot of smart people, right? I would pay homage to probably a person called 𝙁𝙤𝙪𝙧𝙪 𝘼𝙁𝙪𝙧𝙀 and Adam Back. These are the guys who actually got me into Bitcoin to study it a lot more. If it wasn't for their kind of teaching and kind of push to understand Bitcoin, I probably wouldn't be in the space. So those guys are the OGs, I would say. They came into the space, I think, at the same time that I came in. But their knowledge and their material for understanding Bitcoin is top notch. And if anyone wants to study it or understand it, I would highly recommend 𝙁𝙁𝙪𝙧𝙪 𝘼𝙁𝙪𝙧𝙀. And so that classification of me being an OG, I probably wouldn't say that. I would just say the class of 2013 is a good.
But you got on it very, very early on. Was there maybe a little bit of reflection, which is, did you feel that you were part of a very small minority of people who adopted it early on? Was there a lot of pushback? Or did people call you crazy or for believing in Bitcoin in that early stage when it was, I don't know, a few cents or pennies on the dollar?
Yeah, all that. I was that person too, right? I was very lucky to, again, there's a lot of luck and kind of opportunities that have come up in my life. But I was actually introduced to Bitcoin in 2010 when it was like nothing. I was like everyone else. So I was working with someone at 𝘼𝙗𝙗𝙪𝙧𝙪. She came up to me, gave me the white paper and said, hey, I know you really like a lot of bleeding edge stuff. You're a risk taker. You do a lot of technology research. I think you would find this very interesting. So she gave me the Bitcoin white paper. I read it for like, I don't know, maybe a minute. I just glanced at it. The thing that threw me off was because she said her and her husband were mining this Bitcoin on their laptops. And so that lost me already. When I said, so you're mining this thing, this tech called Bitcoin? And she said, yes, on our laptops. And every 10 minutes, I get 50 Bitcoins. And I said, how much is the Bitcoin worth? And she's like, there's no value yet, but it's revolutionary because there's nothing in the world that we've created in technology that can't be copied and pasted. And so this is the only thing that you can't copy and replicate, because everyone's tried to do currency online for a long time. Like there's a lot of people, like Adam Back was Hashcash. One of his actual technologies inside of Bitcoin that's actually created Bitcoin. So there's a lot of people that tried to create it and failed because the tech wasn't there. There wasn't a cryptographic way of actually determining if it was the same amount of money or how you could keep replicating that money and doubling it, right? So that totally lost it for me, and I just threw it under the I threw it under the carpet and I said, you're crazy. I think Mario coins is pretty funny, and I just said no, I'm not gonna. I'm not interested. And then fast forward to 2013, I came back to it and I started actually really understanding it, and that was that aha moment that I said, yeah, I should probably take the ego aside, and I missed a completely huge opportunity in 2010. But I still think I thought I was late in 2013, but I found out really quickly that who I was calling crazy, the next people were calling me crazy, right? Was you're on this Bitcoin path, and I like many other people that kind of stumble onto it, I hid away for like 8 months. All I did was just read and understand Bitcoin. And at that time, there was not enough material online, so you had to search for it. We didn't have AI back in the day. We didn't have easy ways to go and find material. You had to actually go to specific mailing lists. You had to go to join forums. You had to ask people. It was very different time in 2013 to try to learn Bitcoin. So that's why it took so long. And that's why I was so kind of stuck on it, because I fell down to the rabbit hole. And from there, I continued ever since.
What's the most interesting you found on that rabbit hole?
Bitcoin exposes everything. And so what I mean by that is when you start understanding kind of what Bitcoin does for the finance side of things, it opens it up to a lot of other things, not just finance. It figures out what our money supply is, why inflation is around. Experts of economists who say they know how the world should work and how things should be done is very funny, because as soon as you start reading a lot of the stuff outside of Bitcoin and then you come back to Bitcoin, the points of connection are very close to each other. So meaning that if you go to talk to any economist, they'll tell you right away, they say Bitcoin's a joke. They'll never endorse it. They'll say, no, we're of a Keynesianomic model. That's what we've been for a long time, and that's what works for the entire world. But now we see, right? I think everyone knows that in 2024, even 2023, is that inflation is pretty high. Where do you think that inflation comes from, right? So that kind of leads you down the rabbit hole, and I'll leave that for your audience to go look up, like, where does inflation come from, right? And if they think it's because of suppliers and people doing things.
No, it's fiscal monetary policy.
It's monetary policy. It's the printers, right? And everyone does it. U.S. is the biggest offender of money printing. And the problem is that because they're the biggest facilitator of money printing, they're also the global currency. So that messes up everybody. So U.S. is like a huge offender of that, right? So if inflation is at, for example, they say it's 2.6 in the US. If you look at the CPI, which is the Consumer Price Index, it's weighted very differently. So they tell you it's 2.6, but it's probably actually 8 or 9% that they got down from 12, right? Imagine what that would look like in Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, anywhere in Southeast Asia, because they're anchored to the global reserve, which is the US dollar. So if the US dollar inflates, everyone else is inflating massively. Yeah. So that's where Bitcoin comes into place, and you look at a lot of the stuff, and it opens up a lot of other categories that you kind of look into.
Maybe you realize that the chairman of the Federal Reserve shouldn't have all that power, right?
True, yes. And no one should be able to just print money out of thin air every single year. That too.
So I would really want to get your perspective on what's the most significant value of Bitcoin. I know that at least for RMIT, so if any one of you who's studying crypto finance courses, I think she's over there, she's studying crypto finance course, you'll learn that there's a lot of utility in Bitcoin. I think there's a lot of things like there's the medium of exchange value, there's the store of value utility, and there's also the speculative utility, and all sorts of other utility. What do you think is the greatest utility of Bitcoin, the greatest value of Bitcoin, really?
The greatest value of Bitcoin is you are your own bank. So you'll hear the term online where they'll say, not your keys, not your coins. That's very true. So if people really like to manage their own finances, that's what Bitcoin is there for. It's for financial freedom. It's for being a sovereign individual, meaning that you can self-sustain yourself on whatever it is. A lot of these people are very independent, right? There's not a huge bunch of these people, but there are people that feel like I should be able to do that myself. I don't need someone else to manage it for me. And that's where kind of Bitcoin kind of shines, is that it gives you that opportunity to be that independent person, right? You can manage whatever funds you want without the seeing eye of the government anywhere. And you can move very easily around the world and still have the ability to go and exit out to the currencies that you need for daily life. And that's what people are very attracted to Bitcoin for, because it's the central kind of, I guess, asset that has 190 currencies that it can exit out to. And that's what makes it very unique, I think, even though people will say, well, you can do that with the US dollar. That's correct. But the US dollar is inflationary, where Bitcoin is deflationary. There's only going to be ever 21 million Bitcoins, right? And that's not going to change unless there's a consensus of that should change. And so far, for almost 15 years now, that consensus hasn't changed. So I don't think that's going to change at all. Obviously, there's other factors that I believe that would endorse that. Obviously, there's bigger institutions back in the US that support it, and obviously the new government that's coming up under Trump.
So is Bitcoin like every other cryptocurrency? I know that there's an argument in this space. There's somewhat of an infighting between the Bitcoin maximalists, like people who believe that Bitcoin is the only, the best, the one and only, and there shouldn't be the existence of any other cryptocurrencies. And there's the people who believe that decentralization is when you get to create your own cryptos.
Yeah.
So what do you make of that argument, and what do you describe yourself as? A maximalist or a crypto ICO boom freedom person?
Bitcoin maximalist. There's only one. There's nothing else. There's no second best. Bitcoin is the one. And the reason why is because there is nobody at the helm. There's no CEO, there's no foundation, there's no person who created it. There was, or maybe a group, we don't know. And that person doesn't exist anymore. So it's run by a consensus model where there's not one entity that controls it, right? Where all the other blockchains, there's somebody there. There's somebody there to call, there's somebody there to reach out to, and there's somebody there to change the consensus model of that blockchain, right? For example, to give you an example, Ethereum, it changed from proof of work to proof of stake because Vitalik was an influencer and also the inventor of Ethereum. So that kind of messes with a lot of, why would you kind of compare Bitcoin over to this other blockchain when it's just a fork of Bitcoin anyway? They just changed the consensus model, they changed the addressing scheme, and they changed a bunch of things to make it beneficial for him, which was to make smart contracts.
Right.
But if you really look deep down into Ethereum, it was a fork of Bitcoin. So it's the king. It sits on the hill, right? Bitcoin, my analogy to a lot of people is Bitcoin sits on top of a mountain and it looks down at the valley, and software is software. If it looks at a piece of software and says, I think that's very valuable to market, I'll put it in, and they'll absorb it. And then now you don't need Ethereum. You don't need Polygon. You don't need Polkadot. You don't need these other blockchains, because you can let them fight at the bottom of the valley, let them do whatever it is, and then Bitcoin just says, is that really good? That sentiment's good for market value? No problem. Code is code. We'll just absorb it and we'll start building it in. And you can see that happening now. So Lightning Network is going to do all the stuff that Ethereum and Polygon and all these other blockchains are doing. It's going to be absorbed into Bitcoin, and it has the largest market cap. So you can imagine a lot of people will just gravitate to it. So I look at it also as, if you've ever been into 2000, there was this huge fight with the internet. So there was the internet, and then there was the intranet. And the intranet was the one that everyone was saying would be the best thing, right? Because JP Morgan was on there, Goldman Sachs was on there, you name it. Every single person was saying the intranet is better. We have a better wiki because we have all the data, and we can provide all that data a lot more efficient because we own it. And what happened? Fast forward to today, what has won? The internet, because it's open and decentralized. Whereas the intranet was owned by someone, had their own rules, and so that's how I compare the two.
Is this distinction between there's somebody behind it versus there's no one behind it, which is the case of Bitcoin, the central reason why I know this is quite technical, more legal on the legal side, but is this the reason why the SEC is fighting over it? They're really not in favor of listing or seeing all the other cryptos as a legitimate asset.
Correct. If you look at...
Or security, rather. Yeah, sorry, security.
Correct. Look at a definition of a security.
Yeah.
Don't get it twisted. Just look it up. Look at it on Wiki. The definition of a security is you create something to gain a monetary value of something.
Right.
So if you created something on Ethereum had a pre-mine of 70%. And they re-sold that to what? Investors, VCs, whoever else wanted to buy to go and make the development of that network. It kind of smells like a security. If it smells like a security, walks like a security,
it's a security. Yeah, it is a security.
It's a security. So if you look at Bitcoin and the way it was created, was that there was no pre-mine. The mining just happened. Satoshi was given 50 Bitcoin. It's locked in the Genesis block, and every 10 minutes from that point was just a given of 50 Bitcoins every 10 minutes, whoever wanted to be a participant of that network. There was no one given, there was no money, there was no marketing, there was no investor to come in, VC to say, hey, we should give you all this money to prop it up and then sell it to the rest of the general population. There was nothing there like that.
So I think you just made a very controversial statement that will, because our viewers make up a consortium of actual students, but also some of the industry players as well. So you stand by that?
I stand by it, yeah. They can go look up the definition of a security. And if any law or anyone that goes and says that's incorrect, I would go and say, I'm not sure you understand the law correctly, because if you have a pre-mine on something and you sell that to investors or anyone who wants to invest, and then you make a profit from it, that's a security. Regardless of what people say, maybe it's not or whatever it is, it's a security. People don't say it's a security because they don't want to get infringed on the companies that they've built, right? So Ethereum has a foundation now. So does a bunch of these other blockchains like AVAX and all these other ones. There's someone behind it. It would collapse their entire industry if, say, the SEC were to come out and say, these are securities, because now they have to do a different type of framework to be able to be licensed, to be able to go and do their blockchains. That's why there's a huge fight. That's why they haven't been classified as securities. But if you look at the brightest minds, yes, it's going to be very confrontational, right? But maybe that's what we need here, right? Is
we need debate.
We need to understand, and we need to understand like what is real and what is kind of just towing the line, right? And so I think a lot of people would, maybe some people would agree with me and some people would disagree with me, but that's the whole point of the debate. But I think what we see now in kind of the definition of a security, I would stand by and say Ethereum is a security.
Well, I applaud you for having, to stand by your own stance. Yeah. So I want to get more into that, but I want to ask you about, what do you think it is the reason why institutions like, we know that MicroStrategy is investing a huge ton of money into Bitcoin, and recently BlackRock, actually I think earlier this year, they got approved for a Bitcoin ETF, which is a huge deal in this space, right? And it's kind of a breakthrough where it's like the first time that a fringe part of the internet, right? I mean, Bitcoin is part of the internet, right? Where the first time where a fringe part of the internet got mainstream attention in a form of an institution. So why do you think there's a trend to institutionalize Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies in general?
I think people are tired of getting debased. That's my opinion. I think the people that are understanding what Bitcoin does and what it does for what they have the position is, which is a lot of the US dollar, are getting sick of losing percentages of their money, which is in their treasuries. And I think it's come to a point where people who understand that have chosen Bitcoin as what people would call like an inflation hedge, right? Because if you look at Michael Saylor, right? Michael Saylor is a good example. He dissed Bitcoin in 2016.
I think I saw that speech. Right? I think I saw that speech. Yeah.
Somewhere 20s, I think it was 2013 actually. It's pretty early. 2013, 2014. He's a very smart guy. But he even admitted and said, I was wrong, right? In 2016, he said, I was wrong. I'm going to look into it a little bit more. And then lo and behold, he goes, ape into Bitcoin, right? Because he understands the monetary policies and what he's been doing for a long time with his public company. And he's looking for an instrument that changes the world, where not a lot of people understand it yet, but know that there's a massive benefit, right? The same thing with Larry Fink. Larry Fink, again, dissed Bitcoin and just said, yeah, it's not worth anything. And Larry Fink is the CEO of BlackRock. And if he can even go into live television and said, I've made a mistake, I think this is very revolutionary for a lot of people in the world. Whether you come to the conclusion or not, we believe from BlackRock, that's their hedge. And they've created the ETF for their institutional people and their players. A lot of people in the US put their 401k into it now. And that's because I think a lot of people just who understand finance and understand that the monetary policies are not working for the working class anymore. And as that starts getting propagated further and further out, you'll see a lot of people go into Bitcoin because of that, right? So those two head figures obviously are leading it because they see how that monetary policy is working from the government and they just don't like it. And there's nothing wrong with it. They just look at it as it's a hedge in their portfolio. And so I think you'll see more institutions start doing that, more countries, and hopefully somewhere here too as well.
Let's get into politics a bit. So, but not on the very political side, but more of where do you think Bitcoin will go from here? Now that Donald Trump last week won the election. Today is November 15th, so last week was the U.S. election, very big election. And then after that, Bitcoin prices just soared. A lot of people in our club even were watching the election results very, very closely to just figure out the best spot to jump in to invest in it. But speculation aside, what do you think? Where do you think Bitcoin will head in the near future? Now that the government, the U.S. government, is more. I know that Trump is taking a much more friendly approach, more adoptive approach to Bitcoin. Where do you think it will go from here?
For price, it's probably going to go really high. I think it's going to go probably close to $250,000 to $300,000 before we get into another bear market, and then it goes.
And that's not investment advice. So
that's not investment advice.
Do your own research. Due diligence.
Yeah. This is just my opinion on where I think Bitcoin will go. I think it will go to about 300,000. It will probably go to 1 million, but not right away. I think it'll probably go to 1 million within the next 5 to 6 years. There's a lot of obviously points and things that would make it go to 1 million. I think Trump being very positive to it is not because of Bitcoin itself. It's because of the innovation and because of he looks at it as the next generation. And the reason why he's so positive on it is because of his son. It's not because of what he understands of it. It's because his son is the one who's in that era and understands what Bitcoin is and understands what the other cryptocurrencies are. And that's where he gets a lot of his voice of reason, right? So anyone who's a father, who's going up to a father, will rely on their sons to do that because Trump is more about a different generation that understands more monetary policy, administration, business, and everything else like that. He has no time to understand the tech, right? The tech knowledge is literally from his son. You could see it because his son is the one who also helped him do the campaign. Yeah. So that's why his son feeding him that information of Bitcoin and all these other things, being proactive on it and saying you should be more friendly to it because the next generation wants to do it. And he said it in a lot of his speeches is we don't want to lose innovation. We don't want to lose business. And we don't want to lose our brightest and smartest people to other countries, right? Because that's what's happening under, obviously this is a very sensitive issue, but I think the Biden administration was completely horrible, right? A lot of people just left. They just said, I'd rather go working somewhere else. And so you'll see a lot of the remote nomad people, digital workers, come and work in countries like Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, right? And they're all of the smartest minds. And I've always said that if you work in Bitcoin, you're working with the smartest people in the world. It's just a different level of what people do in this industry and how they bring it forward. And so I think that's where the positive stuff is going to come out is because of Barron Trump, is that he's helped facilitate a lot of the understanding to his father, and his father is going to execute on that, being possibly a Bitcoin reserve for the United States, which is be a huge thing. And I think if that does happen, if it does happen, a lot of countries will follow suit.
Do you think it will be a point of a Bitcoin war between nations? Or
no.
Because Well, I do follow a bit about American politics. Trump said in some parts of his speech that he wants the United States to be the leader in Bitcoin. He wants to buy up all the Bitcoin so that the United States has all the reserve in Bitcoin. I mean, it's supposed to be and going back to the decentralization, centralization, it's supposed to be decentralized, but if the U.S. keeps all of it, will there be like an arms race to pile up Bitcoin or,
Yeah, well, I mean, there is already a race, right? It's still going to be decentralized. It's just the U.S. wants to be the largest holder of Bitcoin. So they want to buy the amount of Bitcoin there's a lot of stuff that the reason why they need a Bitcoin reserve, right? And so really high level is everyone knows the U.S. debt is at like probably $35 trillion. How do you offset that, right? Because if you don't offset that, you're telling everyone in the world that U.S. will just keep printing. So what is that money value worth? Because there's bonds, there's treasuries. People buy these. These countries buy these bonds and treasuries. But if you keep printing, they're useless. They're worthless. So I think that if he does the Bitcoin reserve, that's to offset a lot of the debt that they have. And so you'll see a lot of the Bitcoin, if they do have a strategic reserve, that's because they just want to have a lot of, obviously, hedge and inflation against their debt. And I think a lot of other countries will follow.
So maybe a last question on the discussion of Bitcoin, which is, and this is quite, I'm not sure if it's maybe goes against what you're doing, but I think you've mentioned some parts of that earlier in this podcast, which is, do you think that fintech intermediaries, right? So the boon of fintech companies spawn on the back of, or maybe on the foundation of blockchain rather, are they fueling more centralization and more intermediation rather than disintermediation? Are they fueling more centralization, more dependency on the service providers, like the fintech service providers, or are they accelerating decentralization, accelerating cryptocurrency or Bitcoin adoption?
Yeah, I mean, there's two different paths, right? There will be a path of people that just want decentralization. For us at Neutronpay, the reason why we've done more of a custodial centralization point is to get as many people on board as possible. And that's not from a product use case, that's more from an educational use case. Because people need to get onto a technology quicker and easier through means of having it done simply. And what I mean by that is because if anyone's ever done non-custodial services through Bitcoin, it's very difficult. It's a big learning curve, right? There is hardware wallets, there's backups, there's seeds, there's things that you got to make sure that if you lose your seed phrase, you completely lose your Bitcoin altogether, right? So you'll never be able to retrieve it. So that's why there's a huge risk where people don't understand it properly, put a ton of money into it, they lose their seed phrase, and their money's gone forever. That's what Bitcoin does, right? It's very sensitive in that fact that there's no recovery, because if you don't manage your keys properly, you will lose all those funds. So for example, if Michael Saylor were to lose all his keys, that's billions of dollars locked up forever. There is nothing in the world that is able to break that and restore his keys if he's forgotten everything. So that's why there's educational paths, is what I call it, is for our business. Yes, we have a business case for like payments and a bunch of other things, but it's also an educational of actually using it, because then you understand it, you can transact with it, and then we'll go and show people if they want to be a sovereign individual and use non-custodial, we'll have those services to teach them, and they can do it this way. But there will be a big red banner that says, once you go over to that side, we can't help you because you're the owner of the keys, and everything that you do is under your control. So how you store them, how you protect them, is up to the end user. Whereas if you use it with us, we'll protect it. We have services in the back end to make sure everything's obviously protected in different locations, controlled, and you will always have access to your money. Some people will look at that's a service for me, and some people say that's not a service for me. I'd rather do non-custodial. So it's just an option of depending who wants to go where.
What do you think about, I apologize because that was not the last Bitcoin-related question, but well, this is not really a Bitcoin-related question, but more about the Web3 industry.
Yeah.
What do you think about the Web3 industry as a whole? Do you think that... No, actually, before I insert any of my assumptions, what do you think of it? That's a broad question.
I think there's always going to be, evolving from technologies, right? Maybe Web3 is the term for it. Maybe it isn't. I don't necessarily like the term Web3. I think we're moving into a different type of era in the internet, in how we do finance. People call it Web3. I believe, just in my opinion, is to kind of categorize and show people like what we're moving to. But I don't think that's what it is. I think it's just more independence. I think it's giving an option. We're still using the internet, right? Which is, doesn't matter if it's Web 1, Web 2, Web 3, whatever it is. We're still using the internet. Does Bitcoin evolve into the next internet? I don't know. Right now, it's just used for a means of payment, right? But technology always evolves. And so what I believe is that eventually Bitcoin will have the data capabilities of like the internet, where I don't want to get into technical stuff, but the internet, it uses something that's called an OSI model, and it has 7 layers, right? 7 layers to get to this podcast, to get, TikTok videos, streaming. It takes 7 layers. Bitcoin doesn't need all those layers. It maybe goes to 4 layers, but then we can do data services on top of it eventually, I think. But that's down the line. So do we have a separate internet for that? Possibly. But for now, I think it's just the payment side. So I think that's where it would look.
I read an article on CoinDesk the other day. I think it's CoinDesk, right?
Yep.
I'm not sure if it's an opinion segment, but the title was something like the challenge. It's not verbatim, but I'm paraphrasing it, of course. But something like to get the focus for blockchain developers is not money, but time. Essentially, the synopsis of that argument is a lot of people in the Web3 space, they care too much about money, right?
Yeah.
You can think about this argument in many different ways. So, speculation, trading, investments, loans, lending, etc., but also payment solutions like yours. But to get more adoption in this space, you need to make good products, right?
Yes.
You need to save people's time. You need to have really good UI UX, and you need to have really good products. You say that's. What do you make of that argument?
There's 2 categories of people. There is high time preference people and low time preference people. And low time preference people are 90% of the world. Is everyone wants a quick buck. That's just the way it is. That's the way we live. That's the world that we live in, right? And that's why I think everyone's gravitating to a lot of the other blockchains and the so-called Web3 stuff, is because it's fast money. But the problem is that the time that you're getting at that fast money, is it ethical? That's, I think, a lot of the questions that people would ask, right? Because every time anyone mentions, obviously, Web3 or any of this, it's always about tokens or NFTs, right? So what are you doing? Are you putting the time in to develop something to go and then rip somebody off? Because what are you going to do, a rug pull, right? And majority of the time, that's what people are doing. And that's why I call them low time preference, is that they want money. As much as people say it's not for money, there's a small percentage of people that are in the high time preference, which is where I think a lot of Bitcoin people are, right? There's some people that have held Bitcoin for over 10 years, right? And now their fruits of holding that are not even finished yet. They believe it's going to be obviously $1 million, $2 million, $5 million, right? But whatever that number is, that's high time preference people. And they look at it as, this tech is something worth us building, because we're building it for not just for ourselves, but building it for the rest of the world, because everyone else doesn't have access to finance. So if you look at a lot of, obviously in Vietnam, right, a lot of people don't have access to finance because of specific things, right? Obviously there's certain things that we don't provide. And so that's what I put those categories in is, yeah.
Okay, so my last question for you, and we've been talking about an hour now, which quite a lengthy period of time, and I really enjoyed this conversation. But to kind of wrap it off, what would be your advice to young students, especially those in computer engineering major, comp sci, computer science majors, or any IT software related majors? what would be your advice to them? Should they pursue fintech? Should they pursue anything else? And how can they best use their time to achieve success?
Good question. I think from an advice from what I've seen so far, I think the era that we're in is study computer science, do anything in engineering, especially software. The people that don't want to, that's fine. But understand that in the next 10 years, right? If you do not understand just basic level computer science, you will be left behind. I can guarantee you that. Because we live in a world that is very fast paced. It's technology driven outside of Bitcoin, right? Just look at AI. You think that's going to slow down? That's going to go exponentially faster than anyone thinks, right? So if you don't have any type of experience in computer science, you will be left behind. You will be part of the people that will wonder how to be part of society and how to contribute. As dark as that sounds, it's not very dark. It's just you're going to be in a different group. There's going to be a bunch of people that understand computer science that are in, obviously, coding and whatever it is. You can be a developer. You can be a security major. You could be a network management person. You can be infrastructure. But you just have to be in computers. That's just the society we live in today. And as we go forward, I'm not saying everything else is going to get decimated, but I'm saying AI will take everything over, just like how the internet took everything over. So I would say if you want to spend the best amount of your time, right? And again, this is not not saying you should do this. It's just from my personal opinion is if you're going to dedicate 10,000 hours, that's usually the center point. If you take 10,000 hours and dedicate it to a particular topic or an industry, I would say computers. And it'll be hugely beneficial to you because it opens up to other industries.
Reminds me of that Jensen Huang quote, or maybe I'm misquoting him, but he said something along the lines of don't study AI, study something else instead or something.
Yeah, he's saying that because he's there's two things. Obviously, he's a business guy, right? And he wants to keep his stock really high. But also, he still needs developers, right? Yeah. So regardless of where AI goes, that's what I'm saying. If you study computer science, you will always have a job. You will always have a job, right? There's not one section of the world or industry that does not use computers. And anyone who wants to kind of challenge and debate that, I would say give back your cell phone. I'll give you a piece of paper and I'll give you a pencil and we'll see who does business faster on a communications level. So you can go back to old school systems that you think that will never evolve, where phones and tablets and laptops and everything else dominate our daily life. It's just going to get exponentially better and exponentially faster. So that's why I'm really advocating for a lot of computer science. And plus it would probably open up a lot of people's minds on how certain things work. And I think that people, that's what we need, is a lot of people to understand like what's under the hatch and to understand a lot of the systems.
Yeah. We have about 3 people in this room in our studio right now, and for the audience who study comp-sci majors, IT and software engineering, and they must be very happy to hear that comment.
Yeah, you guys will have a lot of money in probably 2 years. You just walk out the door and someone will give you $100,000, maybe $200,000, no problem, because they need developers. It's just there's not enough, right? Because everyone's too busy trying to do like business. They're trying to do real estate. They're trying to do something outside of technical stuff, right? But if you look at every single industry, it all ties to technical computer engineering, right? You need everything. Today, what we're doing on the podcast is used by technology. How do you upload this video? It's by a bunch of engineers who built the infrastructure, right? So that's what I'm saying. Other things will evolve, will be a lot easier. If you're a part of that foundation, you'll be paid handsomely, whereas other people won't.
What do you think about the AI scare? Because these guys here are scared that AI will replace them, or at least that's what the media tells them. What do you think
it will replace a lot of people, but AI is a tool, right? Because that's what I'm saying. If you study computer engineering, you'll understand where that barrier is. You'll understand how to use it to your benefit, right? So a lot of developers now use AI tools to help them build faster, right? I think we're at a time where if you use AI today and you understand how it works, you'll be 100 times better than anyone else in the next 2 years, right? Computer engineering or anyone in comp sci, if you're using AI today, you're part of the 0.1% of the entire world that understands how it works, right? Take that number into consideration and how much you think you would make in the next 2 years, because as that grows, you'll be part of the 1%. That's not even a huge amount of people, right? But everyone thinks, oh yeah, I'll get replaced. You won't get replaced, because if you know the knowledge of what's underneath the hood, that will only benefit you even further. That's why I say you'd have to study it. Other people, that's why I said if you don't study computer engineering, you will be left behind. Those jobs will be completely gone because there's no benefit. AI can do all that. And the person who's programming it will take all those jobs out and go to a business and say, hire me to do it, and I can save your revenue of your business by 30%.
All right, thank you, Albert, for coming on to our podcast today, FinTechTainment, and we'll see you in the next one.